Let me extend our heartfelt welcome for all of you. This is the upcoming event of the Institute for Foreign Affairs and Trade in Hungary, entitled Minilateral Cooperation in the EU, Internal Cohesion, Group Dynamics and Voting Behavior of Selected State Blocs. This is actually an of one of our major research projects that's now becoming to bear fruits. One of the fruits is this publication, which is not only beautiful, but also very thoughtful. And we are having a conversation of those who authored and edited this work and also made the research, of course. So I give a very quick introduction, like just one word for each person of whom we will going to talk about this research project. So first we will have Márton Ugrósdy, director of our institute, for welcoming remarks, and then we will have Monsieur François Roux from EGMONT, Royal Institute for International Relations, where he is a senior advisor on European affairs, for a keynote speech. Then we will have a roundtable discussion with those who crafted this wonderful research and publication. Tamás Levente Molnár from IFAT Hungary, also Nikolett Garai from IFAT Hungary, Vít Havelka from the European Institute for European Policy, Levente Kocsis from the University of Leiden, Matúš Mišík and Juraj Sýkora from the Slovak Foreign Policy Association, and the whole thing will be moderated by me. This is Tamás Baranyi, Deputy Director of IFAT. Thank you for joining us, and I think without further ado, I would pass the word to Mr. Márton Ugrósdy, Director of the Institute for Foreign Affairs and Trade, Hungary, to have his welcoming remarks. Márton, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tamás. I'm going to be very quick because obviously I'm not the most interesting person in this conversation. It's a great pleasure to host this online event today, especially as we will have an excellent set of speakers. On the one hand, we will have the authors of our study who bring the academic perspective to the conversation. And on the other hand, if I may say, we have François Roux, who will look at how this looks in practice. With his extended past in different European institutions, Monsieur Roux will have all the insights which describe how this cooperation works in practice, whereas our colleagues who have been instrumental in crafting this research will be basically presenting the findings, which partly rests on quantitative data, but they have also conducted in-person interviews with the former members of the permanent representations of different member states' permanent representations in Brussels. So without that, I think we should really get to the heart of the matter. And I very much like to thank all of my colleagues and the colleagues from the partner institutions who have taken part in conducting this research. And against all the odds and the restrictions which came with the pandemic, they were able to conduct all the interviews and produce this volume at the end. So a great round of thank you goes to everybody who's taking part in this conversation and who was also putting together the research. And without any further ado, I thank you for your attention and I wish you a very interesting event today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Márton, for your welcoming remarks and also that you still managed to jump in, even though we see that it's not the ideal, most ideal circumstances to join in. But thank you. Again, we are having a sort of dense time frame today, so I will tell you beforehand how much time you will have at your disposal. And in the meantime, I ask those who follow us to send questions during the conversation, because we will have a short period of time for questions and answers at the latter part of actually at the end of the conversation. And the way to ask questions is like sending the questions to all panelists or to me on the Zoom platform for asking questions via chat. So never forget to send questions, and I will not forget to tell you how much time you're expected to talk. Again, this is much about the format, and now I would ask Monsieur François Roux from the EGMONT Institute to have his keynote address about the practicalities of this research. How does this look like in real life? According to the schedule, is it like 12-13 minutes? But of course, we are at the beginning, and this is a keynote speech. So if you feel like talking a little longer, that's okay. But then I will show if anyone is lagging behind the schedule. Sorry, this is the very sorry part of being a moderator. Again, Monsieur Roux, the floor is yours. Please have your keynote speech.
Thank you very much, Tamás, and thank you, Márton, for this invitation. Many thanks for organizing this event. I feel very honored to comment on the issue of minilateralism and especially this multilateral cooperation in European affairs. I would like to congratulate also the authors of this report. I find that this piece of research is extremely timely. It is timely because the period covered by the studies coincides with the time frame of what Mr. Juncker, if I believe, called the poly crisis. And this period of poly crisis is not over. And those who don't believe me should have a look at the agenda of today's European Council, and they will understand that the full-fledged crisis is still going on. So in these challenging times, I think it is important to understand how governments work together, and this is the occasion to share views on the matter. Now, before starting my presentation, I would like to make two remarks. First of all, the views that I will express today are mine and mine only. They do not necessarily reflect the views and position of the country I know best. And my second remark is that my opinions are the opinions of a diplomat, of a practitioner of international relations, and certainly not the opinions of an academic researcher, which I am not and which I never was. Now, to summarize my position on the issue at stake, I would say two things. I believe that minilateral cooperation is a very useful and a very efficient negotiation technique, especially for negotiations in the EU Council on some specific themes. That's my first point. My second point is that the ideological use of minilateral cooperation can be counterproductive, as it can fragment the Union and polarize member state positions. Let me start by my first point, the efficient negotiation method. I find, and this is my experience, that in multilateral diplomacy in general, be it in the UN or the EU, but in European diplomacy in particular, there are two basic principles that have to apply. First principle, whatever you do, always make sure that you are not isolated. The rules applies even more if you represent a small or medium-sized EU member state. And the second rule, before you start negotiations, make sure that you have the latest information. And the multilateral approach offers a sort of backstop of sort of insurance against both these risks. In the context of EU negotiations with 27 member states, minilateral groups serve as a sort of a preparatory body for EU member states at every level, in Council working groups, in COREPER, and even at the level of European Council. And in a way, minilateralism describes precisely how representatives of EU member states negotiate in Brussels. Now, the efficiency of the minilateral method, such as described by Moïse Naim, the father of minilateralism, the one who invented the term, fits perfectly with the reality in COREPER when it faces a stalemate. The smallest group of EU member states with the maximal impact on solving a particular problem, indeed usually offers the way out. Now, ad hoc minilateral mechanisms can bring some benefits to the EU governance and under certain conditions. And Erika Moret, who you referred to in your study, I think makes a very good point in mentioning all the 6 conditions on which minilateral diplomacy can be productive. And personally, I find these prerequisites quite convincing. As a matter of fact, I also share the views that multilateral fatigue, I would call it, as well as the need for less bigger member states to counterbalance the influence of the Franco-German couple have played a role in the rise of minilateralism. But as a practitioner in multilateral diplomacy, I would like to stress, to underline three very practical reasons that make minilateralism so attractive. First, minilateralism is light and it's flexible because of the absence of a rigid supranational structure, which makes a multilateral decisions sometimes so cumbersome and slow. Second, minilateralism makes direct coordination possible. Direct coordination between governments, between administrations, and often directly between EU member states' capital, bypassing, circumventing in a way the permanent representations in Brussels. And this is not necessarily bad. This is sometimes useful. And third, last but not least, I think the limited number of participants make the negotiation in multilateral diplomacy less complex, and as it avoids, in fact, the problem of having different level of governance, which you often meet in multilateral diplomacy. So minilateralism is indeed useful. It's useful to manage some, but no, not all the challenges. Thanks to its efficiency, the minilateral method has often brought solutions to subjects deemed too complex to be addressed directly at the multilateral level. Security and defense are areas where minilateral initiatives were successful. And I think your study shows very clearly, for instance, when you deal with the E3 or when you deal with the Weimar Triangle, it shows very quickly. And what is striking and what struck me in these initiatives is the fact that they embrace EU member states, which have, of course, a geographical and strategical proximity, which is rather logic when you speak about security and defense. They are also developed, I mean, these strategies develop themselves outside institutions, be it the European Union or NATO. They involved bigger member states, which is also very striking, but not necessarily unusual when you deal with defense, of course. And last but not least, despite their variable geometry, all these initiatives have in a way helped build European security and defense. Another area where minilateral diplomacy has been fruitful is EU foreign policy. And I would take the example, I think it's also mentioned in your study, of the E3 plus 3 negotiation with Tehran regarding the nuclear issue. Now, this negotiation happened mainly outside the UN, but once the arrangement was reached, the deal was swiftly approved by the UN Security Council. And in fact, it was hailed as a potential recipe for more effective and efficient future EU foreign policy. So a small group succeeding into making the whole EU famous in a way in succeeding in this negotiation. But unfortunately, minilateralism does not always improve the EU's performance when it does tackle cross-border challenges. And the case in point here is the Europe's refugee crisis, where minilateral initiatives have affected EU policy by amplifying domestic political issues related to migration. Now, the way these minilateral concerns were dealt with in the Council, and the fact that migration is a policy area where multilateral regimes are still weak, have, in my view, made things worse. So, and this is the second part of my presentation, minilateralism should be handled with care. What do I mean by that? Well, first of all, I think the minilateralist approach must, in any case, support the EU as organization. The minilateral method is not some sort of panacea that could by itself solve the many problems that plague the EU decision mechanism. Minilateralism cannot be a substitute for regional cooperation at EU level. And one of the lessons learned from the COVID crisis is that no single member state nor any minilateral group has the legitimacy or the capacity to manage such a crisis solo. As the European construction is confronted with so many challenges, I believe that the minilateral approach is only successful and useful if two conditions are met. First, if and when it complements and improves the collective actions of 27 member states. And second, when it reinforces solidarity and the search for a compromise in the sophisticated regional organization called the EU. The adoption of the Next Generation Recovery and Resilience Plan within a few months is a very good example of how a minilateral approach can work. You remember that at the basic, when this agreement started, it was an agreement between two countries, namely Germany and France, which were then supported by the ECB and another European institution, of course, the Commission, and then endorsed by 25 European member states. And this made success possible. It even produced a small miracle because debt mutualization, which was a taboo until then, which seemed unsurmountable, was finally overcome. But nevertheless, minilateralism should never become what I call an ideological tool. What do I mean by that? When minilateralism becomes ideological, it aggravates the fragmentation within the Union and it worsens the polarization between groups of EU member states. And when minilateral groups become offensive weapons against the EU, they weaken not only the EU institution, but they also weaken the position of the countries belonging to these minilateral groups. I will now pass through three examples, which I think these three examples explain very much what can happen when minilateralism is used to spoil the EU's normal decision-making process. The first topic is enlargement. What is striking about enlargement is the way this commission-driven process has been set aside. Today, everybody can witness that contrary to what the EU treaty says, the process is driven mainly by member states in a purely intergovernmental approach. The leadership of the Commission has been questioned by the Council. Member states sometimes openly disagree with the Commission's progress reports on EU candidate countries. And the calls of the European Parliament on the matter have also been ignored by the Council. Now, this causes chaos, it causes a gridlock, and at the origin of this gridlock, you find the polarized position of several, not one, but several minilateral groups. Another example is the Migration Pact. You will remember that the Migration Pact was presented a year ago by the European Commission. It's another example of what can go wrong, in my view, when an issue becomes too polarized. Contrary to what was expected, the Pact is basically old wine in a new bottle. The Dublin regime is to be continued. The concept of hotspots and the dependence on a return policy which has not worked are still there. So instead of proposing a genuine new proposal, the Commission services chose to negotiate from the start with several minilateral groups which have diverging views on the EU migration policy. And the result is, of course, disappointing. What does this example show? It shows that when the Commission's right of initiative is under threat, the effectiveness of the EU as a regional organization is undermined. My third example is, last but certainly not least, rule of law. The rule of law is being challenged by several member states, not only in the East, but also in the West. And several minilateral groups are being built up and are contributing to the politicization of this debate. Now, the argument that national constitutions or legislations have primacy over EU law or over the European Convention of Human Rights is, in my view, the road to perdition. Why? Because it undermines the foundation on which legal certainty in Europe is built, not only for citizens, but also for the functioning of the single market. So in my view, no, the European Court of Justice does not try to impose public moral standards to member states. If it would go against the principle of pluralism on which the EU construction has been founded. And yes, the primacy of European law goes together or must be read together with the principle of subsidiarity, according to which EU action is or is not justified. I find that the logic of the European democracy is not to impose more Europe, but rather to find the best compromise possible to effectively address today's many challenges. Progress in European democracy can only be made through cooperation and not through confrontation. Therefore, the EU members of a minilateral alliance should always, in my view, respect their constitutional, so-called constitutional, I call it constitutional responsibility of loyal cooperation with the EU institutions, which cannot be weakened, because if they're weakened, it weakens also the position of member states. So let me conclude by saying that in European negotiations, minilateralism is a useful negotiation tool that has yielded, in my view, some spectacular results. Arrangements based on bilateral and minilateral alliance can allow EU member states to achieve more with less and react flexibly to new challenges. Ad hoc arrangements arising outside formal structures can even help to break stalemates that sometimes occur in the EU Council. But when EU member states try to weaponize the minilateral approach to gain more bargaining power, they expose themselves to isolation. And in European diplomacy, this is exactly the position that must absolutely be avoided. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Monsieur Roux, for those excellent ideas that you just shared with us from the more practical point of view, this very issue. Thank you again. Tamás, now I'm turning to you to shed some light on how this research was actually incepted, why is it, and how it is important, and put the whole research into context. Without further ado, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tamás. Thanks a lot. And also, I would like to first thank to Mr. Roux for not just sharing his perspectives about the practical relevance of our study and minilateralism in general, but also about that he reflected our theoretical framework, which we also applied in our research. Before I would like to highlight and explain our goals and our objectives about the research, let me say just a special thanks to the International Visegrad Fund and for their generous support. Without their assistance, this research would not have been possible. So many thanks for that. And I also see that Karolina Janik, our project coordinator, was joining us. Dziękuję bardzo a lot for your patience. Finally, our 1.5 year minilateral journey has come to an end, and we are here to present our results. So again, thank you. And also thanks for all the participants who joined us and who tuned in and decided to spend this afternoon with us. So about our research, it has the title Minilateral Cooperation of the EU. Let me just briefly explain the term minilateral, the buzzword minilateralism, for those who might not be familiar with the term. Just very briefly, in our research, we dedicate a whole section to it. Minilateralism means a group's subgroup. So in our case, the group is the EU, and in the research, we are focusing on 6 subgroups, which are the Benelux, the EU3 or E3, the Mediterranean 7, the Nordic Baltic 6, the Visegrad group, and the Weimar Triangle. Minilateralism means a coalition of 3 or more EU countries that are either exchange views on European policy issues at governmental level with a certain degree of stability and agree on common positions or implement cooperation project. So our intention behind this selection of minilateral groups, as I explained, these 6 minilateral groups, was to choose a relatively heterogeneous groups, which on one hand differ in terms of regional or and functional focus, in size and number, and in terms of their member states, level of integration in time of their establishment. But on the other hand, a lot in this selection allows us to cover the vast majority of EU member states. Our research focused on the internal cohesiveness of these 6 minilateral groups based on the member states' voting behaviors in the Council of the European Union. Also, we examined and compared the functionality and the effectiveness in terms of voting behavior, policy preference formulation, and in inner cohesion as well. Let me say a couple of words about the relevance of our research. In recent years, we have witnessed an increasing number of scientific articles focusing European minilateralism, and many of these articles not only examine the phenomenon of minilateralism from a more theoretical point of view, but also provide theoretical and methodological framework for the research. However, it was our opinion that there was no comprehensive research regarding the inner cohesion of minilateral groups, the level of their effectiveness, and their success to act collectively. These topics have not been conducted as of yet. With our results, we intend to fill this gap by introducing a mixed methodology approach to minilateralism study. One more thing maybe about the outputs. Beside the study volume, which is available both in print, this is the print version of the study, as well as in PDF form at our institute website, which can be downloaded. We have also created a data set about member states' voting records, as well as voting tables of minilateral groups. And we also have some fancy infographics about the voting records of the member states. All these items are available now at our institute's webpage. And now, without further ado, I would like to ask my dear colleagues, Levente and Nikolett, to explain our methodology. Levente, please, first, the floor is yours.
So good afternoon, I'm Levente Kocsis, and I'm going to describe to you the data set used in the quantitative parts of the study. The data set comprises the votes of member state representatives on legislative acts during formal votes in the Council of the European Union. Well, the raw data set is available in courtesy of the Council's Open Data Initiative through an API on the Council's website. Well, the dataset does not only contain votes, but information related to the acts in question, some small details, for example, date, council configuration, policy domain, interinstitutional identifier, etc. Next slide, please. Well, there are several issues with this dataset that I feel I must share with the audience. Well, this dataset contains only formal votes on legislative acts. Well, formal votes are seldom held unless the necessary majority is secured in the Council. So this data set does not reveal cannot reveal the true depth of cooperation. Well, the CODA data set that we used contains the votes from 2010. Thus, a semester is missing. Well, the solution to the first problem is not an easy one. We believe this is unfortunately a limitation that we have to accept. And this limitation highlights the necessity of the qualitative part that we have also included in the study. Well, the solution to the second challenge was that we completed the dataset to cover the entire period of investigation using the summaries summaries of Council acts that are available from the Council's document register. Next slide, please. So in the quantitative parts, we investigate pairwise relations of member states' votes. Two key indicators are used. The first one of them is vote similarity. This is a quite simple metric, the ratio of matching votes versus the total votes. The second one is the number of synchronous contestations, the number of times the two member states opposed or voted against or abstained during the Coomber vote. Well, the limitations of these metrics are the following. It is very difficult to tell what these values mean, what counts as high, what counts as low, as the overall vote distribution of the member states imposes a constraint on the theoretical values of these. Next slide, please. So to alleviate these difficulties, we devised the so-called permutation test. What is going on in this permutation test? First, the vote distribution of every member state is taken to be one of the fundamental characteristics. In addition, the distribution of votes each act has received in the council during the final formal vote, understood as a key property of the act itself. During the test procedure, we simulate random worlds in a way that these macro characteristics are preserved. Next slide, please. So we randomize the input data set in a way that the characteristics of the data set are preserved, calculate vote similarity and synchronous opposition, repeat this thing like 1,000 times, and in the end we get a nice figure that we have here on the screen. So this figure suggests that the observed number of synchronous oppositions between the two countries that we're talking here was 0 over the whole period, whilst it should have been at least 2 if the member state representatives cast their votes randomly according to a pattern. Thus, in this case, we can conclude that the cooperation between the two countries in terms of synchronous oppositions is significantly less than expected under the null hypothesis of randomness. So now I'd like to thank you for your attention, and I hope my short methodological introduction on quantitative parts was understandable. Now I pass the mic to Nikki, who will continue with the underlying methodological foundations of the qualitative part.
Yes, thank you very much. And sorry, I had to skip the slide to unmute myself, but I just go quickly there. So the second part of our methodology was the qualitative part. Next to the voting data analysis, we conducted semi-structured interviews with representatives of EU member states. Altogether, we interviewed a wide range of incumbent and former diplomats who worked at the permanent representations in Brussels, basically, between the time frame of 2009 and 2019. We conducted 17 online interviews with such representatives from 16 different countries. Those were online interviews, basically, because due to COVID-19, we were not able to go to the original plan. We wanted to travel to Brussels to do in-person interviews. However, we had to change the plan because of these unexpected turn of events. The data collection happened between December 2020 and July 2021. We have conducted them via different platforms, Zoom, Teams, WebEx, or there were a couple of instances when we had the interviews via phone calls. We have recorded those interviews, we have transcribed them, and then we used a software called MaxQDA for analyzing the results of the interviews. Basically, we established different types of codes, and we made this coding scheme to be able to analyze the data on the same way. And that's it, basically. I give the floor to the next person, which is Juraj. He's going to introduce the Benelux case study.
Thank you very much, Nikki. And hello, everyone. My name is Juraj Sýkora, and I am from Slovak Foreign Policy Association. My presentation will be dedicated to the Benelux group, which you can also see in the presentation. So first of all, I would like to start with a brief overview of Benelux, which is a minilateral group consisting of Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. The Benelux group was established by countries' governments in exile in 1944 as the customs union, but importance, effectiveness, and also the identity about which we will talk about later of this group wasn't decreased by establishment of European coal and steel community, nor by the development of European economic community. On contrary, Benelux established economic union in 1958, which even deepened the cooperation and integration of internal market. And this agreement was set to expire in 2008. So the Benelux countries decided to update the treaty, and Benelux economic union was changed to Benelux Union, which is now a formal institutional group. Please, Nikki, could you? Yes, thank you. Which is now a formal institutionalized group consisting of the institutions which are displayed here. So as you can see, Benelux is really highly institutionalized and formal group with close cooperation, which is also demonstrated by frequent meetings of prime ministers who meet regularly before European Council to discuss the position. However, during our interviews, diplomats from Benelux declared that these meetings were more often before the pandemic. Nevertheless, data and also claims by the diplomats indicates that countries cooperate with each other in high extent and coordinate their positions. Representatives declare that level of coordination depends on the topic, and they emphasize that Benelux is not a bloc, but they try to cooperate in topics in which they have a compliance, and looking for other partners when the agreement is absenting. Diplomats also claim that very important part of coordination is rotating presidencies, where parliaments sit together and representatives have chance to discuss possible cooperation. Meetings are also held on COREPER and ANTICI level. And what is interesting for me, or interesting situation occurs when we talk about the common statements, because despite the claims about coordination, countries do not tend to issue common statements together. The fact is that even when the Benelux countries are opposing together, for example, as it was in adaptation of legislative act regarding terms of protection of copyright-related rights, all Benelux countries, alongside with 5 others, opposed the proposal. However, Belgium provided the statement alone, so without the Benelux partners. And there are a lot of examples which proves that the claim that Benelux don't tend to provide the statements together. When the overall voting in both periods is examined, it can be observed that the Benelux countries are not the closest partners for each others, and in terms of voting behavior, of course, in terms of voting behavior, and in certain policy areas, they are not even among the first top 10 countries with the highest level of vote similarity. However, according to the permutation test, the Benelux countries cooperate and coordinate with each other on high level. When examining the cooperation and vote similarity inside the Benelux, data shows that all countries have high level of coordination between each other. Based on the voting data, it can be stated that Benelux are the most like-minded in terms of topics you can see on the presentation. However, when looking closer at vote similarity, we can see the interesting phenomenon. Whereas Belgium and Luxembourg are in top 10 ranked countries in vote similarity for another partner, so Netherlands, vice versa view is not true, because for Belgium is the Netherlands on 20th place in vote similarity, and for Luxembourg on 21st place, and the similarity decreased during observed period. However, for I think like relation or cooperation, vote similarity between Belgium and Luxembourg is better, because for Luxembourg, the Belgium is ranked at 5th place, and with highest vote similarity, and Belgium is at 11th for Luxembourg. Now I would like to talk about the topics about which the country's representatives claimed as the ones with high compliance. One of them is justice and home affairs, and institutional, where countries have the similarity at 92%. Even though it sounds as a high number, the reality is that the average of all areas is almost 95%. So similarity is below the average, and this claim is not so accurate. However, it is accurate, but only in the case of Belgium and Luxembourg when the percentage is over average. However, I would like to add that this perception of cooperation can be understood since the countries have common points of interest in justice and home affairs, because we can see, for example, unique initiatives as cross-border police and judicial cooperation, which maintain the public order and save public resources. I would like to emphasize on the economic matters, where the countries are really unified, since the similarity is in both periods almost 100%. We can go to another slide, please. Thank you. Blocking behavior in Benelux is quite different. The country which has the most attempts, blocking attempts, is definitely the Netherlands, which had 29 attempts in first and 20 in the second period. And most block policies were issues of finances, agriculture, justice, and home affairs. Then we have Belgium, which performed 7 attempts, but number increased by more than 100% in second period to 15. So together it is 22 attempts. So the country became more conflictual. When talking about Luxembourg, it cast the least opposing votes. It was 15 during both observed periods. So from the data can be stated that Benelux as the whole became more conflictual. Together, countries had only one blocking attempt together and 3 bilateral oppositions, however, mostly without common statement. Our time is almost over, so I will speed it up. The countries of Benelux indicate the highest vote similarity with France. However, the main reason for the high levels of vote similarity is the conformist character of France. Other top countries are Lithuania, Cyprus, Greece, which you can also see here. And when the countries are asked about closest partner outside the group, they declare that they tend to cooperate with Council Presidency countries, but also with V4. And what is interesting, also with Germany. And I say interesting because according to data, Germany is not in the top 10 ranked countries of vote similarity nor cooperation of any Benelux country. I would like to wrap it up. So in general, the cooperation between the Benelux countries is described by interviews as fluid. So according to them, it really depends on the topic, and maybe also hard to describe because this cooperation could be very informal and ad hoc. And as I said before, and I will end my presentation with it because it kind of summarizes and brings the message. So cooperation depends really on the selected issues. Thank you very much. And I'm ending my presentation with this.
Thank you very much, Juraj. And actually, we already received the question, and if there is a direct question to the presenter, then I think I will pose them like immediately. But also in general, we will have the questions and answers at the end of the conversation. Just one disclaimer that I'm ready for receiving further questions via Zoom chat during the conversation, and thank you for having respected your time limits up till now, and please do it in the following time as well. And now, Juraj, so you received the questions from Anna Kele, one of our followers. That is it true that Luxembourg has the leadership in the Benelux countries when it comes to finances? So that's the question. If you have a succinct answer for that, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you very much for the question. I think that I must look to the tables, but when the when the Luxembourg representative was asked about the finances, it stated that finances are talked especially with the Belgium partner. So the close cooperation about finances is mainly between Belgium and Luxembourg. But this question I would like to also confirm with our data, because I'm not quite sure if the leader country is Luxembourg.
Thank you very much. And now it's a little unclear whose job is to pass forward the word, but the situation being like this, then I'll pass the word to Tamás, whose case study is the E3. Tamás, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Tamás. I'm going to be very brief because our time is running very much. So I had the presentation about the E3, the E3 or EU3, which is an informal, flexible and non-institutionalized minilateral group consisting of France, Germany and the UK that focuses on certain aspects on foreign policy. And in our comparison, this group is to some extent an exception because to the other 5 groups first, because the E3 previously brought together the 3 biggest, economically largest and politically most influential member states of the EU, who differ significantly in their preferences in many EU policy areas and often used to take opposing positions on several EU matters. Second, the E3 is a single issue format, unlike the Benelux, for instance, as it focuses solely on some aspects of foreign policy and European foreign policy. And third, as a consequence of Brexit, the E3 lost the UK as an EU member state, which will have a great impact on the future course of the group in general. So let me just say a couple of words about the analysis of the voting results. Here we can witness radically different results of the 3 member states. First, let me just say a couple of words about France. On the first glance, we could say that France is the EU's yes man because it has the lowest number of non-supporting votes in the EU 28. Altogether 1 against and 2 abstentions both between 2009 and 2019. Germany and the UK end up in the very end of France voting partner list, as we can see on this table on the screen, both in terms of vote similarity as well as synchronous opposition votes. Additionally, after performing the permutation test, what Levente was talking about, we can state that there is no evidence for policy coordination or cooperation between these countries, as both values, Germany's and the UK's, are smaller than expected under the null hypothesis of random contingencies. Next slide, please. About Germany, due to France's very high number of supporting votes, France tops Germany's voting partner list, but the permutation tests suggest us that there is no real coordination between these 2 countries. UK, due to its high non-supporting votes share, ends up at the very end of Germany's list. By comparing the 2 voting results of the 2 periods, we can state that Germany's voting pattern became more conformist over time, more consensual, due to the lower number of non-supporting votes in the second term. About synchronous opposition statistics, I don't have any table here, but everything is in the booklet, or you can also see it in our voting result statistics. Although the UK is on the 2nd place for Germany's synchronous opposition partner list, it cannot be considered as statistically relevant according to our permutation test, and Germany's real opposing partners are more Austria, Bulgaria, Estonia, and also Hungary. Next slide, please. About the UK's voting behavior, it very much differs both to the other E3 members and to the whole EU 27 in general as well, due to its very high amount of non-supporting votes. That's why we could state that the UK is the EU's no man. The UK's closest partners, both in terms of vote similarity, are countries sharing very similar didn't vote vote records, like Ireland. You can see here in the top of the list. mostly in justice and home affairs and in institutional policies due to opt-outs, or has similar synchronous opposition records like Sweden, or even a mixture of both like with Denmark. Maybe one more note, by comparing the two voting results of the two periods, we can state that the UK's voting pattern became more confrontational over time due to a lower number of non-supporting, higher number of non-supporting votes in the second term. To conclude the statistical part, there is little to no evidence for cohesiveness in the voting behavior of the E3 countries. The cooperation between the E3 members do not show in their voting results, neither in voting similarity, overall voting, or when we talk about specific policy areas such as foreign affairs. We didn't receive any evidence for cohesiveness. Now a couple of words about the analysis of the interviews. We were able to conduct interviews with French and German officials, unfortunately not with British one. Both French and German see the E3 as a single issue format, which focuses mainly on some aspects of foreign policy, be it the Iran nuclear deal or the crisis in Libya or UN Security Council resolutions. The cooperation among the E3 members in the Brussels day-to-day basis is basically non-existent, according to our respondents. We received no evidence from any of the interviewees that the E3 members would hold meetings, formally or informally, and coordinate their positions before European Council, the Council, or COREPER. But the seemingly lack of cooperation in the Council and working groups does not necessarily mean that the E3's level of cooperation is zero, rather that the cooperation doesn't take place in the EU structures, but on different stages, mainly between capital cities. The EC as a minilateral group is not considered as a relevant factor during the negotiation processes in various EU institutions. Instead, from the member states' perspectives, the decisive question is which country would take which position on any given file, and based on that, which would be the coalition of like-minded countries. Coming to the closest partner of E3 members, based on the interviews, both respondents claim that the French-German tandem is for their countries the most important cooperation format in the EU. This is based on our knowledge from politics and history, is no surprise, but an important finding, none at least, particularly against the background of their voting statistics. So, which would suggest that the partner rankings would be actually different. When asked about the future prospects of the E3, it seems that this topic is a subject of concern among its members. The cooperation with the UK in foreign policy matters will be continued. Both member states representative conformly to us. But on the one hand, there is little sense in discussing affairs in Brussels when the UK is not at the table anymore. And on the other, the two remaining E3 EU members have to be careful not to sideline or outmaneuver the EU or the European External Action Service when it comes to choosing partners between the UK and the EU. So to conclude, the cooperation in voting behavior between the E3 members is not reflected in their voting results. The E3 members do not prioritize the format when it comes to day-to-day operations within the Council and related working groups. The cooperation between the member states is mainly realized between the capital cities, and they tend to cooperate in a quite ad hoc manner, meaning that they turn to like-minded countries than to set formats. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for so punctually honoring your 8-minute time frame. And now I would pass the word to Matúš Mišík from the Slovak Foreign Policy Association, whose case study was the Mediterranean 7. Please, Matúš, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the floor, and thank you very much for having me here today and also within the project. It has been a pleasure. I'm going to talk about Mediterranean 7 countries, which are sometimes also called Southern 7 countries because there's 7 of them, and they are like in the southern part of the European Union. And this is a very informal and very ad hoc group that is not institutionalized in any way. During our interviews, even some of the respondents says that this group is definitely not comparable to, for example, Visegrad group, which works in a much more different and more institutionalized way, which is a little bit paradoxical because Visegrad 4 is not that much institutionalized, as we will hear in a bit. So this is a really very informal group, and I will come to the details a little bit later. So it consists of Cyprus, France, Greece, Italy, Malta, and Portugal and Spain, and also Slovenia and Croatia are thinking about joining this group quite soon, this year or next year. It was established in 2013. And initiated by Cyprus and Spain. And first, just the ministers met quite irregularly. Later, these meetings turned into a regular summit in 2016. So now the head of the states and presidents meet once a year, usually during the presidency. It's connected to the presidency of the council. There is nothing like common priorities. The priorities or the group decides, or the group's priorities are based on ad hoc convergence of preferences of these 7 countries. So there is nothing like agenda or beforehand agreed upon topics. So this is very ad hoc. And for example, currently the big issue is migration, but this topic can be changed pretty easily. I'm sorry, I cannot. Okay. I hope everything fine. So this group is not really. Is everything okay? I had some technical problems, so I hope everything is fine.
I hear and see you.
Okay, my screen went blank for a second. Sorry. So this group is not very perfect. This group is not very relevant for EU politics. It's strong group because there are a couple of really big countries, but because of the lack of kind of a stronger preferences, which I'll get to a little later, makes this group quite weak. Next slide, please. So there, when we looked at the quantitative data on the voting patterns, there is really no evidence of cohesiveness of this group. The group doesn't. When we look at the data for the whole period and all policies, the group doesn't vote in unison. There was an exception with foreign affairs area or foreign affairs policy, but this policy is very specific due to the way how decisions are taken. So this policy was the most unison one in all groups basically, but this is caused by different reasons, not really by the reasons of that the group itself is interested in this or votes similar in this policy. So even in this very specific policy, Italy was outliner. It voted differently, but this difference was only very minor. So it has been already mentioned, France is a specific country that doesn't really vote against the majority in the Council of the European Union. And when looked at from perspective of this Southern 7 group or Mediterranean 7 group, we can see that 4 other groups vote very similarly to France. So 5 countries vote very similarly. Other 2 countries voted a little bit differently. However, France voted mostly similar with Lithuania, but this similarity is only very little bigger than voting pattern with other countries. So differences is 0.09% higher voting similarity of France with Lithuania than with the I think it was Cyprus, the second country in the ranking. The biggest outlier is actually Malta, that votes most differently from the whole group when you look at the data from most general perspective. Next slide, please. And when we looked at the particular policy, this was actually very interesting in this group, because we would expect this group that they would kind of create a very special. I mean, they would try to create an alliance when it comes to issues like fisheries, for example, or policy issues like fisheries or agriculture. The opposite was true. The least unanimous voting was recorded in area of fisheries. So basically, they don't want to cooperate together. They are fighting in the area that is very important for them, and probably this is the reason why they are fighting, because fisheries is so important for them, and also agriculture was very similarly voted about. So foreign affairs policy area was the one where the most similar voting happened, and only Italy voted differently. As was already said before, France opposed minimum number of proposals, and this was in contrast to other big members of this group, like Spain or Italy, that were much more active, and more active meaning they were much more against the majority during voting in the Council of the European Union. And when we looked at whether there is some unison when it comes to opposition, so when we looked at how many countries of the group voted against something, we learned that only 4 times during period from 2009 to 2019, it happened that 3 countries from this group, maximum 3 countries, voted in unison against something. And these were very, very technical proposals connected to transportation. Next slide, please. And then we, of course, looked at interviews. Unfortunately, we had only 3 interviews. We were not able to do interviews with all members, and this was my personal fault. So I'm really sorry about that. The whole team, I'm sorry. It was very difficult. I learned that it was difficult to do those interviews. But what we learned from the interviews that we had was that this is really, I mean, our interviewees were saying that this is informal group, and that some members of the group, for example, France, they have very many interests in many areas and regions, and this southern part of the EU was only one of interest of France. So that would also kind of explain why France was not so much into this group, that France is also part of the EU free group, for example. So the French-German engine of the Europe was also mentioned during the interviews. But the southern part of France was interested also in cooperation, but the rest of the France was, or for the rest of the France, this cooperation wasn't that important, or cooperation within this group. They do meet. This group does meet before council to discuss things, how to do things, how to proceed during discussions. But this is very, very logistical. Let's put it this way, very, very technical. So they cooperate on technical and logistical issues, like who is going to talk, whether minister is going to be present, and issues like that. They don't really talk meat. They don't talk what are their positions. They do not try to. Sorry. They do not try to create some kind of a convergence of their preferences, or to find common positions. They don't do that. They just talk kind of technical things. And I think I will stop now. I hope I didn't speak too much. Thank you very much for your attention.
No, thank you very much, Matúš. Actually, it's just on time. So now I turn to you the following case study, that is the Baltic Nordic 3 by Levente. And please, the floor is yours for the case.
So good afternoon. I'm wanted to talk about our results regarding the Nordic Baltic 6. First, some brief history and introduction is in order. Well, the Nordic Baltic 6 is a loose and informal cooperation among EU members of the Nordic Baltic 8, namely Denmark, Estonia, Finland, Lithuania, Latvia, and Sweden. Cooperation between the Nordic and Baltic states have existed for a long time now. The Nordic Baltic 8 was created in 1992. The Nordic Baltic 6 has became a thing with the accession of the Baltic states into the European Union, so it existed since 2004. Please, the next slide. Okay. So, as I've already mentioned, it is an informal, non-institutionalized cooperation. Meetings are usually held in national capitals or through the permanent representations. The most notable meeting format of this group is the so-called MB6 breakfast that usually takes place before Foreign Affairs Council or General Affairs Council or even European Council meetings. And also several expert level meetings are usually held in between higher level consultations. Next slide, please. So the role in EU politics, well, the countries making up the MB6 are quite small in terms of GDP and population as well. The combined population of this group was a mere 5.4% of the EU 28 in 2019. So they are a small a group of countries. They have little prospects to stop qualified majority votes to pass on their own. They have no coordinated positions, no regular joint statements. Several members of this group are also members of other informal groups, such as the Frugal Four in the form of Sweden and Denmark and Finland almost. In relation to this, we expect weak or no evidence of cohesion among the countries of this group. And we expect somewhat stronger cooperation between Sweden and Denmark, in part due to the membership of the Frugal Four, and some stronger cooperation between Baltic states because of their similar development needs. Please, the next slide. So the quantitative results. Well, what we see here is a very heterogeneous distribution across the participating countries in this group. This should be kept in mind when interpreting similarities, as they affect the similarity values that we might have. The table is worth taking a look at. We see that Denmark has the highest share of non-supportive votes. The vast majority of them is non-participation. That is the consequence of Danish opt-outs or non-participations in enhanced cooperations. Please, the next slide. So as expected, the Danish votes were found to be the least similar to the others. The similarities range from about 88.25% with Sweden to a little bit higher, almost 90% with Lithuania. Well, in case of the Baltic states and Finland, pairwise similarities were found high, with the lowest value being 27.74% between Finland and Lithuania, and the highest between Lithuania and Latvia. But it was also worth to be added that the Swedish and Danish votes were distinctly dissimilar from the others. Nevertheless, from the Swedish perspective, the Finnish votes were the second most similar to the Swedish ones. I hope this makes sense. If not, please throw me a question. Next slide, please. So the observed values in all cases are higher between the group countries of this, between the member countries of this group. But this is not a unique property of member states in this group. There are several other outside member states for which this relationship holds. Okay, so the analysis of synchronous oppositions also fails to provide strong evidence of group cohesion. The most frequent partners of Sweden were the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, and please, next slide, please. The Netherlands, Austria, basically the UK plus the Frugal Four. In the case of Denmark, a similar order holds. So actually, we were looking for evidence of cohesion between the MBA6, but we find evidence of cohesion in case of the FUBA4. It is especially a consequence of finance, including budget-related cooperation. Well, let's go to finance. Finland had the highest number of synchronous contestations with Denmark, Hungary, Sweden, and the UK. And also, with this, we could say that Finland's ties are stronger with Denmark and with Sweden than with the other Baltic states. Also, a very weak sign of cooperation in terms of synchronous oppositions is observed among the Baltic states. 0 or at max 2 synchronous contestations during the whole observed period. So, next slide, please. So now I'd like to talk about the qualitative results of this research. Well, all of the interviewees classified the MB6 as an informal group with a varying intensity that varies from case to case. The Lithuanian interviewee added that it was a value-based, informal, and pragmatic cooperation that focuses on big issues. According to the interviewees, the main area of cooperation is foreign affairs. All of the interviewees mentioned that. However, the Danish and the Estonian interviewees also mentioned internal market-related issues where the cooperation is strongest. We find evidence of neither of them in the voting data, but that is quite expected. According to the interviewees, the benefits of stronger cooperation include enhanced information sharing and increased coordination and better negotiating power in cases where compromise is possible. It's crucial in cases where compromise is possible. Compromise is not always possible. Please, the next slide. Then, but what are the negatives that the interviewers mentioned? Well, the Estonian, Finnish, Swedish, and Latvian, interviews mentioned that cooperation based solely on geographical proximity might create or exacerbate cleavages between member states. This is virtually the thing that Monsieur Roux said in his keynote speech. Even the Danish interview added that group pressure might prevent others from taking a different position. And the interviewee cited the Visegrad 4 as an example of that happening. When confronted whether they perceive some differences between the old versus new EU members, the respondent said that they have seen no such connection. Well, when asked about the consequences of Brexit or the future of the grouping, all respondents agreed that it has a significant impact on how this group functions. Well, it is quite interesting to see that the Swedish part added that their alliance building activities will have to improve, as the UK, as we have seen in the data, proved to be a useful ally for the Swedish when it came to opposing EU legislation. But also the Swedish one added that the Nordic Baltic Six should not lock themselves up in a formal cooperation with other Nordic Baltics or with anyone else in the EU. But on the other hand, the Estonian and Latvian interviewees suggested that closer cooperation between the NB6 is necessary in the future. So next slide, please. So the conclusion, the NB6 is an informal loose-knit cooperation of Nordic Baltic countries. Well, the aim of and the purpose of this cooperation is enhanced information sharing and cooperation in cases where it is possible. We failed to provide strong evidence of group cohesion through qualitative and quantitative means, though we observed some partitioning within the group on Denmark and Sweden being one slightly cohesive group, especially in finance, and on the other, the Baltic states, and with Finland with somewhere in between the two distinct clusters. Well, this idea might be explained by if we contrast the more reserved positions of Denmark and Sweden in finance with the generally pro-integration attitudes of the Baltics and Finland, and also give it a bit old versus new tint that incorporates the different development and social backgrounds of the states in this minilateral grouping. And thank you very much for your attention. I'm a bit over time. I'm sorry for this. but I give back the mic to the next presenter. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for the mic, Levente, and thank you for your presentation. The upcoming one is about the Visegrad 4, so we give double attention to, and it's presented by Vít from the Europeum. So Vít, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for giving me the floor. So my task is now to summarize the key findings that we managed to gather during our research. At the very beginning, I will just summarize what the V4 is. It's an informal group of states, Central European states, established in 1991. Subsequently, in 2001, institution that the Visegrad consists on, the International Visegrad Fund was established, and it's the only existing institution of the Visegrad 4. Otherwise, the entire cooperation can be perceived and considered as rather loose and informal. However, the ties within the Visegrad 4 goes from the very top level, so the prime ministers, to the very bottom level, the regional cooperation. It's kind of interesting that on one side you have a not institutionalized organization, but simultaneously the government officials as well as the politicians, they tend to cooperate or at least gather and discuss issues. According to our respondents, the Visegrad 4 has irregular COREPER meetings. They happen usually once per month. They are a bit broader, so the ambassadors gather and discuss a topic and also invite some other participants, for example, from the EU institutions. Also, what is important to mention that there are regular meetings of prime ministers before each European Council. So, and these are the only regular meetings that the Czech officials have on the EU level. Please, next slide. So a couple of main findings. The first one is that we do have an evidence for some degree of voting cohesion. The statistical analysis showed that all Visegrad 4 member states, they do tend to vote together more regularly than it would be expected just by randomized voting. Secondly, the greatest overlap within the group is between the Czech Republic and Slovakia. It's around 96.5% of all votings. Furthermore, these two countries, they also tend to oppose EU legislation together on the most regular basis. Then what is also important to point out that Hungary and Poland tend to be in general less consensual with the EU, let's say, mainstream or how the states vote, whereas the Czech Republic and Slovak Republic, they tend to be more consensual. The difference is around 1 or 2 percentual points, which is kind of significant when we consider that the average overlap is around 95–96%. Thirdly, we can definitely see in the data some kind of V2+2 dynamics. On one side there is Slovakia and the Czech Republic, and on the other side there is Hungary and Poland. We can see this dynamic both in voting similarity, but also in opposition voting, as I will elaborate a bit more in detail on the next slide. And sorry, could you just go back for a second? I just wanted to mention that apart from the cooperation or the voting similarity within the V4, we do have another overlap with other EU member states. Those are predominantly the Baltic states, Romania, Greece, and Cyprus. And the Czech Republic and Slovakia, they somehow stand out in these traditional, let's say, partners of the V4. in the sense that they have pretty high voting similarity with Finland and Slovenia. Now it's time for the next slide. Thank you very much. Now to the opposition votes, as I mentioned, there is definitely a very strong evidence for V+2+ dynamic. Although the opposition votes were I would say, quite high, it has never happened that the entire V4 would oppose something together in the period 2009 to 2019. However, the joint opposition between Slovakia and the Czech Republic on one side and Hungary and Poland was pretty high. It was 9 simultaneous opposition votes. And we can then say that if the V4 member states oppose a legislation, they tend to group in like these two separate groups. Finally, what I would like to point out to the quantitative part of our research, that to some degree our respondents also confirmed the V+2+ dynamic, and this is also strengthened by comparison between the two legislative periods, because in the first period, 2009 to 2014, the states, the voting similarity of the V4 member states was pretty even, but in the second legislative period, 2014 till 2019, we could definitely witness a significant divergence between the Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Hungary and Poland on the other side. And final point to the Visegrad for when it comes to identity, which we also studied, our respondents mentioned that the V4 has some kind of a inner identity, at least that's what they feel, and they tend to mention that the Visegrad 4 represents Central Europe. And by this last point, I'll pass the floor to Mr. Berani.
Thank you very much for this presentation, Vít. And giving further the floor to Nikki, last but not least, to our colleague, who is going to talk about the Weimar Triangle, probably one of the most mysterious one. How did you trace this minilateralism? Nikki, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's always very painful to be the last presenter, so I try to stick to the point. I knew that we were going in the alphabetical order, so I will skip the historical specificities in the study, which is uploaded to our website. You can basically read a lot about the 30 years of Weimar Triangle and the in-group dynamics and policies, what they had success and failure together. So I will just briefly summarize the main findings of the quantitative and the qualitative part. So first of all, it is very apparent that in the second term, divergent national interest of the three different countries, Germany, France, and Poland, they were more divergent, especially in the second term. The overall vote similarity for France during this whole observed period was highest with Lithuania, followed by Cyprus and Finland, and Poland only ranked the 21st, while Germany the 24th. So it's not a good escalation of relationship. For Germany, the highest vote similarity was with France, with Cyprus and Lithuania. However, Poland ranked only the 23rd for them, and Poland's first three partners in overall vote similarity were Lithuania, Cyprus, and Romania. However, I have to mention here that by comparing the two different periods, French and German's positions came closer to each other in the second part, which can be reasoned by the escalating Franco-German tandem by Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron's lead. However, Poland moved further away from both Germany and France during this second observed period. And just as an interesting fact, for all three Weimar countries, Ireland, Denmark, and the UK scored the lowest values in general when it came to vote similarity. The lowest vote similarity could be observed between Germany and Poland regarding employment and social issues. That's an interesting caveat for future reference and for future studies. The wage competition, for example, is a particular issue in which Poland positions differ significantly from German and the French ones. So this is one reason behind that. And in case of agricultural issues, vote similarity between France and Germany decreased from the first to the second political cycle. You can see the numbers on the slide. This is also an interesting fact considering the current budget allocations. Let's go to the next one, which is still the quantitative results. When it comes to joint opposition or non-supporting votes, there can be observed a significant difference in the behavior of the three countries. So as it was mentioned several times, France favors a culture of compromise. To be honest, it contested only once against or voted against one proposal. And of course, it was casted in policy field in which French people hold the dearest to themselves. Of course, I'm talking about regulation regarding wines, aromatized wines, basically. And the two other issues which they abstained was all the time in agricultural policies, like there was a directive regarding honey and the trade of seal products. So we can conclude that France only made non-supporting votes in the field of agriculture. When it comes to Germany, there is a huge number of non-supporting votes, namely 49 in the two observed periods, whereas for is only 43 such instances, so Poland is in between the two countries. German oppositions were made basically in tourism and transport policy field, employment and social affairs, environment and health issues, and that was the same for Poland as well, with the exception that the highest non-supportive votes were made in environment and health and justice and home affairs. Of course, it has to be mentioned that there were no instance in the observed 10 periods when the three countries voted against together a certain proposal, nor is there any case when Germany and France or Poland and France voted against something. So I would say that this is a very important aspect of our study, and we can conclude that we cannot talk about the V3 as a coherent minilateral group in the sense of joint oppositions. Now let's go to the qualitative results. I'd like to point out three different variables that we were checking or cross-checking during the interviews. The first one was the regularity of the cooperation. The second one was in-group dynamics, and the third one was identity. When it comes to regularity, all participants said that there was no regular coordination between the three countries. However, if you read the study, you will see in the first introductory part that recently there has been a short revitalization of coordination efforts due to geopolitical reasons. When it comes to preferences, instead of the V3, all countries like to do negotiations in other minilateral formats like the Big Five or the Big Six. So this is the most common configuration where all countries are present. Plus, they'd like to do negotiation with the country who holds the EU presidency or the trio When it comes to group dynamics, Franco-German tandem is regarded as the most important partnership by both Germany and France. Poland's first choice of partner within the V3 is, of course, Germany. However, when we go outside of Poland, of the V3, Poland's first choice of partner is obviously the Hungary and other V4 countries. And let's go to the next slide. For Germany, it is Austria and Netherlands. They were mentioned here by Germany. Hungary and other V4 member countries were listed as the close partner of Poland. I have already mentioned it. And when it comes to group identity, there was a lot of interesting answers, which I quoted, but altogether, the main takeaway was that there is no strong group identity. For example, the French representative said that V3 does not need to have a common identity because it is an element of a pragmatic toolbox of coalition building. So they regarded that identity is not needed at all to cooperate in minilateral platforms. However, there were other representatives who said that, for example, shared historical experiences can be somehow part of Weimar identity. So I would like to stop with this and go to the conclusions, which will be presented by Tamás.
Hey, thanks, Nikki. Sorry for our participants that we go into extra time. I try to limit my speech and be very brief. So about our main findings. Based on the results from the voting data, this is our first finding. We can state that in every examined group, the internal cohesion has strong limitations. But on the other hand, we have evidence that the internal cohesion depends largely on the level of institutionalization of the respective group. In this respect, the most institutionalized minilateral group we were focusing on by far is actually the Benelux. And although the three countries are not the biggest voting partners of each other, our permutation test suggests that there is a high-level coordination of the country positions. Same applies to the Visegrad 4, with the difference that the V4 is actually, as we have heard in Vít's presentation, is not an institutionalized format in real terms, but we can see similar results. Here we have evidence for a higher level policy coordination amongst its members. When it comes to the MB6 and the MET7, both informal and non-institutionalized groups with some level of coordination, we can see traces of coordination of positions based on the voting records. But when it comes to the E3 and the Weimar Triangle, we didn't find any evidence for policy coordination. Also, this is one of our findings of the research, that in most of the observed groups, we can see statistically significant traces for internal group dynamics. In terms of the Benelux, we see a stronger Belgian-Luxembourg link and the weaker link to the Netherlands. In terms of the Southern European member states, there is one bloc, Cyprus and Malta, which is sometimes joined by Greece. And on the other hand, there are the Iberian countries, Spain and Portugal. With regard to the MB6, there is a stronger tie between Denmark and Sweden. And on the other hand, among the Baltic states, while Finland is basically playing the role of the bridge between these two blocks. And with regard to the V4, we can see a V2+2 dynamics in the group. Next slide, please. Looking at the share of an average group members non-supporting votes compared to the all votes, we can see that there was an increase in the level of conflict in the council between 2009 and 14 and 2014 and 19. The individual results, when we analyze them, are telling us that there was the largest growth of non-supporting votes for the V4, mainly thanks to the Polish and Hungarian increases. The second largest is Benelux. Here, mainly the Belgian increase is striking. The Dutch level of non-supporting votes were consistently high. With regard to the E3, we can also observe an increase. It is mainly due to the UK's voting pattern, which was growing, while Germany's voting record was falling. The MES7 shared voting patterns remains the same. It is quite consensual, and the MB6 and the V3 are becoming less conflictual over time. Next slide, please. So our third finding, beside examining the internal cohesiveness of the voting behavior of the 6 groups, the study also analyzed the dynamics and possible alliances between 2 or more countries. In this regard, our findings suggest that minilateral groups have a much smaller influence on the overall functioning of the work within the Council than we initially anticipated. The general assessment of our respondents regarding the minilateral groups was that they do not really fit into the political and diplomatic realities in the Council, because these formats do not provide their members with the flexibility that is needed for negotiations. Frequently emphasized argument during the interviews was that the minilateral groups can have a very rigid character when member states frequently stick to the same format, thereby make it difficult for EU 27 or 28 frames to reach a consensus. Most interviewees say that the work in the Council can be characterized as fluid, flexible and ad hoc, where coalitions are variable and constantly changing. And rather than the minilateral groups, it is the so-called like-minded groups that constitute the decisive factor, as these are organized in a flexible manner around the single files that are being discussed. As European politics largely depend on, which is our finding number 5, largely depend on variable coalitions of like-minded groups, the vast majority of our respondents could not clearly define the level of cooperation within the group or name the most important contact partner of their country. Here I go to finding number 6. But also is important the institutional mechanisms, like which country is holding the EU presidency or which countries are in the same trio presidencies. Also important is the so-called finding number 7, the interpersonal relations, which are playing a key role. Many respondents told us that the seating order, for instance, play a crucial role. So who is sitting near to each other, or who is have personal ties with diplomats of member states from their previous posting. So these are all informal elements and cannot really be measured by voting statistics. Going to finding number 8, it is basically that the minilateral groups are beneficial for a wide range of issues. They can facilitate exchange of information, functioning. They can function as an enhanced power multiplier tool for its members, and they provide the ability to pre-cook decision or test ideas in a smaller circles. But as I was saying, the minilateral groups, there's a more practical tool than the minilateral groups for the work in the Council, which is these like-minded groups. So the minilateral groups are an important tool in a toolbox, but they are just one tool in the toolbox amongst others. And finally, I won't go into details because our time is extremely out. Brexit will be a catalyst for, and it will expedite the bloc building nature of EU politics, as the many member states lost their most valuable and influential partner in a broad range of policy areas. About all these findings, you can read more in details in the study, which I would recommend you to do so. With this, I will stop and give back the floor to Tamás.
Thank you very much, Tamás, for this thorough and succinct reading of your conclusions. Now we are in a little trouble because we are lagging behind the schedule. So I think we will have a very limited Q&A session because we've had some questions and I have many more in mind. So I really propose to keep on discussing this issue rather than, you know, to try to pack all those in this very short Q&A session. But we've had, for instance, one question, that's actually two questions, but maybe we can address the first part of this question. So it seems that Hungary and Poland have become the EU's no man. That I think is a highly relevant question also with regards to some of the conclusions that you've had at this study. Now, who has the guts to give an answer to this question? Monsieur Roux, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. No, the question is related to Croatia. I mean, the vote of Hungary and Poland have strategic diplomatic style, but the reason why Croatia didn't, did something else was that Croatia became a member in 2013, and just 7 years after that, it exercised the presidency. And I can tell you that they prepared themselves years in advance to make sure that they were not opposing too much the rules and falling outside the qualified majority vote. If I may, I would like to answer also the other question on Benelux and Luxembourg. Yes, Luxembourg is indeed a financial place in competition with Geneva and London, in fact. It has, this situation has provoked some tensions, including with Belgium, because of tax evasion problem. The other issue we had with our Luxembourg friends was that in the 80s, we decided unilaterally to devaluate quite substantially what used to be the Belgian franc, which was also the money which was used in Luxembourg, and we didn't warn our neighbors. So there's a contentious and there's a contentious issue there. I just wanted to remind. But on the rest, I mean, there is something on the method which I think must be said, because we're dealing here with a period which was very challenging, and this period brought a major change, which is the role the European Council is playing since 2009, since the Lisbon Treaty became into force. And in the European Council, it is unanimity. And therefore, minilateral group have much more influence in the European Council than in the line ministries, where you have decision-making done with qualified majority vote. And this is an important element. And I think if you analyze the voting pattern, or not even because they don't vote actually in the European Council, but the attitude of member states in the European Council, you would get another picture. And I'll stop there.
Many thanks, Monsieur, for giving those thorough answers. I'm again very sorry not to have the opportunity to have more questions, but I think for these questions I would also need your insights, Tamás, to put some broader context to those questions, and I think then it will time to close this conversation for the time being.
Thanks a lot. About the block building nature of the EU politics, a lot of respondents we were talking to were emphasizing the fact that with the UK leaving the European Union, it is going to be expedited. One of the respondents, it was a Luxembourgian diplomat, said that with the UK out, it is going to be a lose-lose for the French tandem, because on the one hand, if they are not proposing ambitious goals, that the remaining parts of the EU is going to be complaining that the tandem is not working sufficiently. On the other hand, if they are proposing too much, that then the remaining members could actually say, okay, what is going on in the EU? The motor, the engine of the EU is not functioning properly. So with this, the whole European power triangle equilibrium is actually over, and new alliances are needed. And for this purpose, the multilateral groups are actually playing a very important role, just as we have witnessed it last summer at the European Council negotiations about the MFF and the NGU, when a new bloc of more fiscally conservative countries, the Frugal Four, Sweden, the Netherlands, Austria, and Denmark, forged a coalition and went against the proposal of France and Germany. And we are going to see, in my opinion, very similar approaches in the future of the EU. So with this, I think I would like to stop here. We try to mention lots of elements, a lot of aspects of our study, but a lot of them are still in the book. So I would like to encourage you, to download it from our website. And again, lots of thanks to the International Visegrad Fund to make it possible, make this research project possible. And with this, for the last closing words, I would like to give it back to Tamás. Thank you.
Thank you. That's also the time for me to say thank you. Thank you for this great conversation to begin with. And also thank you for this magnificent research that is, again, looks like this, but it's also easily downloadable from our website. It was done by the researchers present here with the generous support of the International Visegrad Fund. And it was given a framework by the Institute for Foreign Affairs and Trade, Hungary. Again, I think this is only the beginning of those conversations, because this is a very important topic. It was very clear from the presentations and the discussion, and it is only now picking up steam. So it's going to be even more important. It will even be in the political debate, and it will be something to pay attention to. Right now, I thank for the participant of this discussion, to Juraj Sýkora from the SFPA, for Matúš Mišík from the same institution, Vít Havelka from the Europeum, and also Nikki and Tamás for our institution, the Institute for Foreign Affairs and Trade, and a special thanks to Monsieur François Roux, who was kind enough to join us and share his thoughts about this very important topic in a practical way. This was Tamás Baranyi, Deputy Director of IFAT, and thank you for coming, and stay tuned, because this will continue. Thank you.